Number 10. Hysteria. I've been waiting a long time to talk about this. Okay, so technically the treatment ended up being a good thing, but it was more the condition they lied about. As a hint to where this is going, hysteria comes from the Greek word hystera, which means uterus. By the end of the 19th century, 75% of women in America were diagnosed with hysteria. It was a term to describe a condition where an excess of emotion led to an out-of-control behavior. Symptoms included shortness of breath, anxiety, forwardness, irritability, agitation, insomnia, and even sometimes hallucinations. So, in other words, a very, very bad mood. One of the treatments used to remedy this were pelvic massages to achieve a hysterical paroxysm in order to stabilize and de-stress the patient. In today's terms, we call that an orgasm, which was something hysterical women didn't get a lot of, or women around that time in general. Pelvic massages have been performed as early as ancient Greece to cure the wandering womb, a fictitious condition where women's wombs were autonomous and would wander into their shoulder, for example, making it sore. The treatment was so popular, doctors finally thought it was time to invent a device who could do it for them. So they invented a device that vibrated in a particularly efficient way to achieve the result. The device remains very popular today, but the term hysteria has been debunked as an umbrella term to describe a multitude of actual disorders and conditions.
Coming up at our number 9 spot, we have fruit. Hear me out for a minute. Fruit is not dark, obviously. Fruit is delicious. I'm a big fan of fruit. But if I was told that I had to put fruit inside my reproductive parts, then yeah, I would certainly change my perspective on fruit. Just imagine how much that would hurt. Well, women once upon a time were encouraged by doctors to crush up juniper berries and smear them on their parts. The reason being that it was believed that the berries would interfere with impregnation and thus it would help prevent the woman from becoming pregnant. Apparently there are studies that have shown that the berries probably did interfere with conception, but I mean, I bet the burn or possible itchiness from the fruit might have made doing this not worth it. One can only assume.
Number 8. Fenmen. Everybody wants a quick fix, but they are rarely ever real. The first diet pill hit the market in the late 1800s, and today the weight loss industry is valued at over $60 billion, with a large portion of that being mainly diet pills. The only two known appetite suppressants were fenfluramine and phentermine, but they didn't prove to be largely effective. However, one Dr. Michael Van Traub decided to combine them and make a new miracle weight loss drug in the 1970s called Fen-Phen. At first it appeared to work wonders. A single study of 120 patients over 4 years, terrible study size, just saying, saw the majority of female patients lose an average of 30 pounds. There were apparently no side effects, but no one was actually studying their hearts. It was introduced in 1992 and it swept the nation. After a rough debate, the FDA approved it, but in 1996, things went bad. Almost like perfect timing. 24 women taking the pills developed serious heart problems, and soon hundreds more were reported. Because of this severe oversight, the American Home and Products Corporation, inventors of Fen-Phen, had to pay $3.75 billion settlement. 50,000 more settlement cases were filed. So much for a quick fix, eh? Number 7. Radium. I learned about this recently through a series of lists and I still can't believe it. Radium is a radioactive substance that we know now can cause a series of life-threatening complications after repeated exposure. But in the late 19th and early 20th century, this stuff was used for everything. From skincare to toothpaste and water, this stuff was put in everything. From as early as 1896, the effects radium had against cancer were noticed, but soon it became a cure-all for most things like diabetes, rheumatism, and even impotence. As a result, a massive radium industry in the 1920s boomed, and soon you could find it on every shelf in the pharmacy. It was even recommended to drink a glass of water with radium in it because it was good for your health. But then people started to notice some pretty serious side effects such as, I don't know, organs failing, muscle and bone deterioration. You know, all the things radioactive exposure does to a person. The period lasted for 25 years, but by the time World War II hit, the product was considered dangerous. Can I say doctors lied about it if they didn't really know the full effects of the material? Not quite, but at the same time, prescribing something they didn't quite understand doesn't sound very truthful, does it? Number 6, the starvation doctor. Got a cold? Starve yourself. Got depression? Starve yourself. Got cancer? Yeah, don't eat food. Sounds ridiculous, right? Good. Because it is. But to Linda Burfield Hazard, it was the most sensible treatment one could do. Once she gained her medical license through a loophole, Linda preached that strict fasting was the only cure for disease. In her novels Fasting for the Cure of Disease and Scientific Fasting, the Ancient and Modern Key to Health, she spread her pseudo-scientific message wherever anyone would listen. She believed that all illnesses were a result of excess eating and that you had to starve yourself for months to stave off disease. Crazy. So she created her own sanitarium where she would only allow patients to drink tomato juice, asparagus juice, and sometimes a teaspoon of orange juice. Ridiculous. Once patients were in her care, if they tried to leave, she would have them declared insane. After 40 patients died, she was finally convicted of manslaughter in 1912 and was sentenced to hard labor. But for some reason, she was pardoned after 2 years. Then she moved to New Zealand and tried to practice there, but her license was revoked because of lack of credentials. Moral of the story, if someone tells you to starve yourself, make them watch you eat a burrito and smile. Number 5, lobotomies. Of course this was going to be on the list. The miracle procedure invented by Walter Freeman. Finally there was a way to alleviate the pain and distress of the mentally and emotionally tormented by turning them into vegetables. So not really curing it at all. Freeman was an absolute crook of a doctor, though he wasn't seen as one at the time. He developed what was known as the prefrontal lobotomy, a procedure that involved removing a section of the brain. Early versions involved drilling into the brain, but the new version involved an ice pick through the eye. He would sometimes even use the one he found in his kitchen. Delightful. Freeman's procedure left thousands of patients incapacitated, including one very famous Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of the future president. More than 15% of his patients died, one during a live broadcast. Despite this, hospitals willingly let him showcase and perform the procedure, which blows my mind. Freeman was more of a showman than he was a doctor. He drove around in a car he called the lobotomobile, and then he just performed lobotomies wherever he wanted to. Finally, in 1967, he performed his last surgery on a woman in Berkeley, California. He severed a blood vessel and she died, thus ending his deceptive brain hacking miracle. Number 4, yes sir, awad. Okay. Gets crazy from here. This one happened back in 2003. When Maria Martinez was just 10 years old, she started having headaches so severe she had to isolate herself away from the light. So she went to the doctor, yes sir, Awad, a pediatric neurologist. He sent her to have an EEG, and Awad came to the conclusion that she was having seizures. Though she had no convulsions, he told her that they were absent seizures, which mostly featured a person kind of mentally checking out, so every time she daydreamed she thought she was having a seizure. Very subtle, but they do exist. He prescribed her a medication called Lamictal, though after several months on the medication, her condition got worse, so he doubled the dose. Skip ahead 4 years, Martinez gets a second opinion after Awad left his practice. Finds out the whole thing was a lie and that the medication actually causes headaches. She never had seizures. Awad was doing it so he could get more money. She was one of hundreds of patients that Awad intentionally misled. Her case was the first to go on trial and shed a massive light on hospital fraud. Number 3, opioids. The opioid crisis remains one of the most devastating pharmaceutical deceptions in history. The Sackler family and their company Purdue Pharma developed a new miracle drug called Oxycontin that swept the nation. It was a revolutionary new painkiller that could help patients all over the place, and that it did. The Sackler family racked in $35 billion in sales of the drug. But there was a catch, as there always is. Oxycontin contains oxycodone, a relative to heroin, aka the dragon, which made it 2 times more powerful than morphine, but just as addictive. But Purdue launched a campaign to intentionally mislead their audience in 1996 that said that Oxycontin was safe. Their catchphrase? Oxycontin, the drug to start with and to stay with. But of course, the phrase had deadly consequences. Since 1999, 200,000 people have died due to Oxycontin overdoses. Number 2, Jayant Patel. Next up, we have the man known as Dr. Death. Jayant Patel worked in both Australia and the USA and was apparently obsessed with putting people under the knife. He lied about his knowledge and competence and would often perform unnecessary surgeries on people who weren't even his patients. His lies led to the deaths of over 87 people. He was the worst combination of arrogant and stupid. He even performed a colonoscopy backwards. How do you do that? How? Beyond the actual surgeries, he would forge the documents pre and post surgery. It took a strangely long amount of time for him to be caught, even with fellow surgeons calling him out. But finally he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but was sadly released. I hate this, but was sadly released 3.5 years after because he had good behavior. Great. Never mind that he killed so many people. The thing that makes me the most angry about this case is that he wasn't the only one who lied. Both of the hospitals he worked at let him perform with dodgy and thin credentials, which means they share the responsibility for those deaths as well. And last but not least, number 1, trial by trachea. Though lab-grown organs are slowly becoming reality, it appears they remain too good to be true. Unless you're Paolo Macchiarini, who continues to evade criticism surrounding his artificially grown trachea treatment. In 2011, Paolo shocked the world when he performed the world's first synthetic organ transplant. He replaced the patient's trachea with a plastic tube made perfectly for him. The surgeon gained worldwide fame, so much fame that even his hospital dismissed notions that the medical miracle man wasn't up to snuff. A couple investigations discovered that the foundation for the procedure was weak and that risk analysis wasn't carried out thoroughly. Out of 9 patients, 7 of them have passed away, but the questions surrounding Paolo mostly criticizes the things that happened prior to surgery. Were the patients ill enough that they required such drastic intervention, or was Paolo too eager to gain attention? I'm endlessly appreciative of the work doctors and nurses do. They are frickin' heroes. But sadly, where there are heroes, there are always villains.
In our number 10 spot, we have female genital mutilation. This of course is one of the darkest topics on this list, and that is why I had to speak about it first. It is something that is still practiced in many places around the world, and it is deeply horrific to think about. Ancient Romans would put fastened clasps through the female genitalia of slaves to prevent any form of intercourse. Eventually, surgical infibulation of women became more popular. It was known as pharaonic circumcision in Sudan and Sudanese circumcision in Egypt. Religious groups and many other cultures still practice this today. In some countries such as Egypt, medical practitioners assist with this, sometimes with anesthesia and sometimes without. And according to a Uganda nurse, the person who's performing the procedure will sometimes use the same device on up to 30 different potentially spreading disease. So these women not only don't have control over their bodies, but also they could be getting sick from this. Truly so devastating.
Number 9. The placebo effect. The mind is a powerful thing. It can tell you something is really wrong, or it can lie to you, which is one of the reasons why doctors sometimes prescribe placebos. They take advantage of the power of suggestion. In a study for the journal PLOS1, out of 783 doctors, of which 71% were registered with the UK's General Medicine Council, 97% said that they had used substances or methods that lacked therapeutic value, aka they prescribed placebos. Only a tenth said that they were actually upfront about it, but half said that the therapy helped many other patients. Some placebos included vitamin C for cancer, saline injections, and sugar pills. The effectiveness of placebos, if it is a psychological issue, only works as well as the patient believes it will. But bottom line, prescribing something that you know has actually no value is unethical. One of the worst cases actually happened recently. An anti-vax German nurse gave over 8,000 people saline instead of the vaccine to give them a false sense of immunity because they just didn't believe in it.
In our number 8 spot, we have Victorian explosions. I do not know how else to put this one, so bear with me. I'm going to try not to laugh as we speak about Victorian explosions. You'll understand what I mean in a second. Apparently, at the height of the Victorian era, doctors would treat female patients by stimulating their reproductive areas to a point of explosion. That's some great medical care right there. But the reasoning behind it is a little unfortunate. Males thought that their female other halves were too emotional, and this was done to treat female hysteria. Honestly, I think I speak for all females when I say this is a pretty good solution. This was very scandalous back then, and I'm sure there were some inappropriate stories that may have occurred with these procedures that were perhaps dark. Eventually, an electronic device was made that helped doctors so that they didn't have sore wrists. And then, as you know, these devices eventually became take-home devices that a lot of people around the world own today. Okay, moving on. In our number 7 spot, we have the skin of a pomegranate. I love pomegranates, but not in this way. Another recommended birth control practice for you. This one might make you feel so uncomfortable that you'll want to throw on your warmest PJs, crawl into the covers, and watch Once Upon a Time all day while stuffing your face with movie theater popcorn. Oh, that's not what you do when you're uncomfortable? Just me then? Whatever. Apparently in ancient Greece, women were advised by their physicians to, wait for it, take the skin of a pomegranate, add water, and put it inside their reproductive parts. Once inserted, they were advised to have a drink of honey water. Why? No clue. Honestly, this one feels like some man was angry at his wife and got his doctor to tell her to do something like this out of revenge, and then she just told a girlfriend and that girlfriend told another friend until it began a full-on trend that doctors were advising. All in the name of preventing pregnancy. Yikes, so dark. You know when someone tells you that they're itchy and you instantly feel like you're now itchy? That's how I feel right now. In our number 6 spot, we have giving birth. As you can imagine, giving birth is probably one of the most painful things a woman or anyone could ever go through. I wouldn't know because I'm not at that stage in my life yet, but I can imagine modern medicines such as epidurals and whatnot makes this experience a lot less painful. Once upon a time, the epidural did not exist, and women had to fully endure the maximum amount of pain always. But arguably, maybe even more pain when I tell you about what they were encouraged to do. Are you ready? First off, they were encouraged to drink vinegar. Yikes, I can just taste it in my mouth. The only thing vinegar is good for is fish and chips. Just put some salt and vinegar on my chips and I'll be in heaven. Apparently the mother would be given gemstones to comfort the child when it was born, which sounds awfully nice and annoying at the same time. Oh yes, thank you, Doc, for these gemstones. I really feel it taking away my pain. Not. They were also encouraged to put on a holy girdle. Oh, and here's the grand finale. They were rubbed with eagle dung. Probably for luck, but I couldn't find any real reason. These poor mamas. In our number 5 spot, we have a medieval contraception. This next one is fascinating to me, as not only was this encouraged by medical practitioners, but it was something that a society believed as a whole during this time, men and women. It is certainly easier to get someone to do something if you convince them that it will help them. Anyways, in medieval Europe, the Europeans believed that a woman could actually prevent pregnancy if she wore male weasel reproductive parts around her neck or her thigh. Come again, Mel? Yeah, you heard me. I mean, I want to say that they didn't fully believe this and that it was just a sort of charm, but no, they did. Well, honestly, I can imagine that nothing would put you off a partner more than them smelling like a weasel's privates. There were other birth control options you could choose from though, such as donkey poop charms, or a specific bone from a black cat. And the cat had to be black, otherwise the charm wouldn't work. All the poor Salems of the world being used as charms. That's a Sabrina the Teenage Witch reference for those of you that don't know who Salem is. In our number 4 spot, we have poop for contraception. So we talked about poop being rubbed on women. We talked about poop being worn to ward off love interests. But we have not talked about poop being put inside of women. Gosh, I am so glad to be a woman in Canada in this time period, Lord. In ancient Egypt, the women were told to smear crocodile dung and honey inside and around their intimate parts to prevent themselves from getting pregnant. In the Middle East, they preferred elephant dung. Oh boy. Yeah, the thought of this makes me want to vomit, but apparently the elephant dung may have worked, as the poop has a higher alkaline pH and that would act as an effective spermicide, but some think that the increase in pH would have made it more likely that the female would have gotten pregnant, so honestly, who knows. Thank God that is a dark practice left in the past. In our number 3 spot, we have the stuttering solution. This wasn't just on women, but also men, but it needed an honorable mention because it is horrifying that this procedure was once practiced. In the 18th and 19th century, medical practitioners would perform a surgery called a hemiglossectomy, where a portion of a patient's tongue would be removed. Why was this done? Well, it was believed to be the cure for stuttering. Your girl stutters like every 5 seconds. There are days when I film these videos and my mouth hurts and it's hard to talk. I honestly push myself to do them because it's a part of my job, but still. Imagine if I was alive in the 18th century when this procedure was done. I would be missing a portion of my tongue because someone would have made me get this surgery by now. I'd be like one of the witches, actually all 3 of the witches from Hocus Pocus when they ate their okay, anyways. In 2022, when a person stutters, we chalk it up to anxiety or a speech impediment. Imagine going from the 18th century to now. Apparently, sometimes the patients would bleed so hard from this surgery that they would die. Wow. In our number 2 spot, we have the Crazer. The Crazer was a medical device used to strangle uterine and ovarian tumors as well as hemorrhoids. Well, I know what you're thinking. This isn't really that dark. In fact, it seems light because tumors are horrific and they needed to be removed, for sure. And during that time, they did what they could with what they had. It just feels dark because the idea of this device is terrifying and would certainly be dark if used today. Its chain was placed around the base of the growth and gradually tightened. This would cut off the blood flow to the growth until it dropped off, or the chain would cut through the growth. Ugh. Apparently this was obviously painful, but not as much as doing it by hand without the device. Yeah, honestly, I bet you it was just as painful both ways, but this way maybe more because it would be, you know, psychologically traumatizing. I would definitely have had PTSD after this procedure if I had it done. In our number 1 spot, we have the treatment for insanity. We talked earlier about how doctors had come up with a solution to treat female hysteria, basically during that time of month when females would be extremely hormonal. Well, there was also another treatment for insanity, which was also used to prevent women from receiving any kind of pleasure. Yes, it was believed to cure nymphomania in 19th century Europe and the United States. I bet it also was a depopulation strategy and an act of power over women. Again, I am grateful that I will never have to endure what these women had to.
Brings us to number 10. After World War II, a lot of doctors were concerned about the idea of radioactivity and chemical warfare. So during an experiment done at Vanderbilt University, 829 pregnant women were given a vitamin drink, and they were told that it would help them improve the health of their babies. But in reality, the drink, well, it actually contained radioactive iron because they wanted to study how fast the radioisotope would cross over into the placenta. At least 7 of the babies later died, and they died from the cancer, and the women experienced a ton of negative reactions such as anemia, hair loss, tooth decay, and cancer. I mean, what the heck? Number 9 takes us to a doctor who is trying to save a few pennies. A man over in India was driving a school bus, but he swerved the bus to avoid hitting a herd of cattle. He managed to save all the kids on his bus, but his left leg needed to be amputated, so they rushed him to the hospital to have that surgically removed as soon as possible. While he was recovering, the doctor wanted to raise the head of the bed, and instead of reaching for another pillow, well, he settled on using the amputated leg as a makeshift pillow. I guess no one was around to tell him that that's a pretty messed up thing to do if you're a normal human being. But can we just talk about this for a second? The doctor literally used his freshly amputated leg as a pillow. Is this real life right now? This has to be one of the most messed up things I've heard all day. I mean, where did he get his medical license from? Maybe the same place people are getting their driver's license from, the cereal box, Captain Crunch. Well, if he was this lazy to just grab another pillow, I mean, what corners is he cutting in the operating room? I don't even want to know the answer to that, so you know what, let's move on. An insurance scam comes into this list next up at number 8. Dr. Yasser Awad was a pediatric neurologist in Detroit who falsely diagnosed 255 patients with epilepsy in order to make more money through insurance reimbursements. So basically, he put over 200 kids through unnecessary stress and drug treatments so that he can make a quick buck. This is how he makes his money. But that's not all. He also performed unnecessary surgeries where he would implant devices where he was supposed to control seizures. So I guess the moral of this story here is to always get a second opinion, because some doctors out there are just plain savages. Moving on to number 7 on this list, we have unnecessary surgeries. Dr. Arya Sabit was sentenced to 20 years in prison for performing unnecessary spinal surgeries on patients. They are calling this doctor a butcher because these patients didn't even need these risky spinal surgeries in the first place. Okay, so I've had 2 back surgeries and I know for a fact they aren't fun, but unlike these poor people, I actually needed it. Or actually, did I? Did I need it? No, I think I did. Well, after their botched spinal surgeries, they were left in a lot of pain because they would either insert unnecessary medical devices into their spine or would just cut into their spines for no apparent reason. The doctor pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud because he made a lot of money when he used these spinal devices into his patients. But even though he pleaded guilty, he still plans on appealing his sentencing because he thinks his sentence was excessive. You want to know what's excessive? Tricking people into getting spinal surgeries that they don't even need. That is excessive. Dr. Death is up next at number 6. Over the course of just 2 years, Christopher Dunch, he operated on 38 patients and he left 31 of them paralyzed or seriously injured, and 2 of them actually passed away. He had a bright future as a neurosurgeon, but he fell off the rails when he started to do a lot of drugs. Imagine your doctor is on drugs. They eventually stripped him of his medical license, and about a year and a half after, he was arrested on 5 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of injury to a child, elderly, and disabled person. He was sentenced to life in prison and he will be eligible for parole in 2045. I think we should just forget about this guy in prison and just let him finish up his life there. But maybe that's just me. A plastic surgeon with questionable morals brings us to number 5. If you've ever had surgery, then you know how much anxiety and fear comes with it. Well, it doesn't help the fact that there are surgeons out there that do something like this. Take a look at this.
A surgeon dances and plays around with an unconscious patient on the table. Well, now the doctor's methods and her marketing videos are under fire.
Okay, she called herself Dr. Booty, and she would record rap videos advertising her plastic surgery services, and she would post them onto the internet. I mean, it's pretty awkward if you ask me, and if anything, her rap videos would make me stay far away from her. But things get even more cringy when she started to use unconscious patients in her videos. I mean, that's a little bit too far. This is obviously illegal, and she had her medical license suspended for 2.5 years, but I don't know why it was just 2.5 years. It should have just been suspended forever. On top of her terrible rap videos, which should be shut down, she butchered and disfigured a lot of her patients, and she even caused one of them to end up with permanent brain damage. A very twisted fertility doctor is up next at number 4. Most fertility doctors are reputable and they're very good at their jobs. However, there are some of them who abuse their trust. Well, Dr. Cecil Jacobson reassured his patients that he would be using the sperm from their patients or from from an anonymous donor that they have carefully selected. Well, he actually used his own sperm to impregnate them during the artificial insemination procedure. When it was finally discovered, what was going on, well, he was convicted in 1992, and it was determined that he was the biological father to 15 of his patients' children. But it's speculated that he could actually be the father to over 75 other kids. I mean, that is a lot of child support, but that is pretty messed up. An extremely botched plastic surgery brings us to number 3. A patient named Radium went to a black market pumping party where they would be given cheaper alternatives to cosmetic injections. It doesn't take a rocket science to know that this sounds super sketchy and highly illegal. Well, she went anyway, and what did her money get her? Well, the doctor injected used cement and tire sealant into her face. I mean, is this real life right now? Obviously these injections caused her severe pain, but they also started to burn and create hard areas all over her face. She even appeared on an episode of Botched where they try to fix her face, but there's always going to be a risk that the infections are going to come back. Because right now the infections is still in her bloodstream, so it's still lingering in her body. And I watched that episode of Botched and it was pretty messed up. It was hard to watch. One of America's first serial killers comes into this list at number 2. We've talked about this guy, this doc, many times. Dr. H.H. Holmes opened up his very own hotel with nothing but murder on his mind. His hotel was basically a torture chamber that was full of acid pits, trapdoors, gas chambers, staircases to nowhere, and a human-sized stove. After torturing his victims, he would drop their bodies down the chute, he would dissect them, clean them, and sell their organs or skeletons to schools or the black market. I mean, what schools are paying for this? After decades of getting away with this, he was finally arrested and put behind bars. He admitted to killing at least 27 people, but his true victim count might be in the 200s. Topping this list at number 1, we're talking about Unit 731. From the years 1937 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army developed a secret biological and chemical warfare research experiment called Unit 731. Men, women, children, even babies, even pregnant women and the elderly were all subjected to harsh experiments that included the removal of organs from a live body, amputation, being exposed to deadly viruses, and weapons testing. Some prisoners even had their stomachs surgically removed and their esophagus was reattached to their intestines. I mean, what the heck? What kind of vision is this? Thousands of humans were experimented on and killed at Unit 731, and I'm sure this is something we would all like to forget about ever happened.